Greg is going to show us something about this septic system. Thanks for being here with us, Greg.
Sure. The reason we're here is the house is the main source of the septic. The house has been bought, and then they wanted to add more bedrooms to it, so the septic system wasn't adequate in size to accommodate the extra bedroom.
How old was it?
I think this one was roughly about probably 25 years old, something like that.
So it wouldn't have lasted much longer, even if the size wasn't an issue, probably.
No, it's in marginal shape. It's working. You don't see any surfacing effluent or anything, so it's working at the load it's taking. It's just, you know, with the added bedrooms, the county health department requires us to upgrade the system to match the bedroom size.
Right.
So at that point, then we had come in and excavated and found the existing sewer line that was coming out of the house. So any of the thing that it's used, dishwasher, the toilets, any plumbing fixtures, the dishwasher, disposal, clothes washer, anything that's used will actually come down out of the house through the house plumbing and down into this 4-inch PVC sewer line and come down into this way and then into the septic tank. One of the things that you have to consider when you're upsizing a septic system or sizing it for a house is that it is sized adequately for the amount of bedrooms that are in the septic or in the house.
This one's pretty near the surface, so inspectors are liable to see, actually inspectors are liable not to see the tank or the lids. Is that right?
Exactly. A lot of counties have put in their codes that their access lids, as these are within 12 inches to the ground. It is one of the things that is hard for the counties to control because of landscaping and such. After the installer is gone, they can add soil to it and add too much to have them find it. So finding them.
Yeah.
Hopefully when, like on this one, Boulder County Health Department has took measurements off the house and has the diagram on their website and that you can get from the County Health Department to find this tank again. We have, in our company, we usually bring these risers. They have a seal on them and bring them to the top of the ground so that the grass layer will be up to here so that they can, the easier it is to pump a tank, they are liable to pump it when needed.
Yeah. So one good place for inspectors to start if they're going to be inspecting septic systems is at the local county health department or
That's
the
what I
building
would
department.
first recommend is going to the county health department and finding out everything that you can find out on the property. If it's been sized right, bedroom wise, the tank sizes, it has usually all the leach and field sizes so that you can first off, before you go out on site, find out even if it's been documented right and that it's been permitted right, and having that information. And usually most of the homeowners have never looked at that, and it's nice to have in their hand.
Hopefully they pumped it though.
Yeah, hopefully they pump it, but a lot of times it gets forgotten about.
So we can see the pipe coming in, and now an inspector who opens it up, I guess if we follow in order, we'd be taking off this lid first. And so if we're looking straight down into the pipe, we see the inlet coming in. What should an inspector look for?
One of the important things is finding out the inlet tee is in proper shape. What that does is when the system gets older, there'll be a scum layer that gets created on top of the water layer, and if this tee isn't in place, it lets the water or solids coming out of the house come into the tank, and if that scum layer is up above this pipe, it will create an obstruction and let the sewage back up.
Right.
And then you have more potential of getting clogs and such in the sewer line.
So you could wind up with a blockage in the inlet pipe if it got too high, if there were no baffle blocking the scum layer.
Exactly. So now what happens now is the water and solids will go down and then go down into the pipe and then float out that way, and then they separate.
And I guess this baffle And there's also another type of baffle that attaches to the wall, so it might not be a T. It might
Yeah, there's a lot of different type of tank manufacturers, and they have different ways of doing the baffle. This is mostly what everybody's gone to. The one problem with a lot of the concrete ones is that the gases in the septic tank do attack cement. So and that's where you get your deterioration, and we can look at the old one to show you that in a bit here. But so the concrete ones, you can start to lose, you know,
some of these baffles are made of concrete and they'll corrode over time.
Yeah, they will corrode over time. But most tank companies are going to plastic tees now, so this is what we see.
So I guess another thing the inlet baffle does is slow the water down so it doesn't create too much turbulence in the main
Exactly, it'll
main
just,
chamber.
you know, all the solids and everything go down into there, so you don't get a lot of motion. Then halfway, it is required county regulations that it be that this tank is a 2-compartment septic tank. So about 2/3 through this tank, there's a wall that goes through that has another 90-degree baffle coming down also. So what we're trying to do is trying to more or less filter out or give retention through this to let the solids settle out of the effluent.
So this is actually a primary treatment tank, and it's one of the things it does is it allows solids to settle out.
Exactly, because our main objective is just to have effluent exiting the tank.
So we've got a partition wall down the center. Does that come all the way up to the top of the tank? And
no, it doesn't. It's about 8 inches or so. We can look at that when we pull this here.
Okay.
You should be able to see it from this angle.
So waste comes in the inlet pipe, hits the baffles, goes down into the first chamber, and solids will settle out there, and a scum layer will start to build, and in the middle there's an area of clear effluent.
Yeah, effluent, and then you'll get the sludge layer in the bottom.
And then the effluent spills over into the second chamber.
Exactly.
And what happens in the second chamber?
The second chamber is pretty much what the first one does. It's just one more chamber. We're just, again, trying to filter out the solids from the effluent so that we can get just pure effluent going out into here to discharge into the leaching field.
So we've got heavy solids settling out over here and lighter solids.
Exactly. You won't see as many solids in the second compartment, and that all depends on how often they ought to pump it. We recommend, depending on the house use, and everyone's different, is anywhere from 2 to 4 years in pumping a septic tank. And it just, if you have an honest pumper, you know, when it's pumped, you can just ask them, okay, can I go more, you know, more time, less time, you know, and usually they've seen enough tanks that they can tell you. And as long as the usage stays the same, they should be able to, you know, tell you pretty much what to do on that end of the pumping schedule.
So one of the things that can affect the conditions of the tank is, say, how many people live in the house, or whether they've had children and built an addition, or there are more plumbing fixtures.
Exactly, it's the usage. That's all kinds of comes down. The septic system is sized per bedroom. But again, you know, it can be a big house with only 2 people in it.
Yeah,
but I mean,
true.
again, you don't know if its system gets, or the house gets sold to somebody with a bigger family. So that's why it's always sized per bedroom in Boulder County.
Nothing much real simple about inspecting these or figuring out whether it's good enough to serve whoever's living in the house, or
Yeah, I mean, it's
a lot of liability here, huh?
exactly. There's a lot of liability. There's a lot of stuff that's hidden on a septic, especially at the point when this one gets all backfilled.
So we've got solids, we've got waste coming into the first tank, heavy solids settling out in the first chamber, spilling over into the second tank, and lighter solids still settling out here. And anything different that we need to be looking for in the outlet?
Exactly. The outlet baffle is probably the most important part of the whole leaching field, or the whole septic system. It holds all the solids and everything out that can actually go out into the leaching field. If it happened to fall off or cracked off or something, then we have just the solids going right out into the leaching field and have it a potential of sealing off and getting out into the soil under the leaching field and sealing that soil. So that's, as far as inspection wise, that is probably one of the most important things to look for.
So those can get damaged through corrosion, or how else might it get damaged?
Sometimes pumpers, you know, can actually hit one, you know, putting their hose down in it. Generally, with the newer type, like newer meaning the last probably 15 years or so, 20 years, this is the type of baffle you see. We don't see a lot of problems with this.
The T-shape.
The T-shape, PVC T-shape. The old concrete baffles like that were like half moon that were actually formed into the septic tank. They had more potential of the gases rotting away the cement and then them eroding and going down, and then all of a sudden the solids will float over them and then go out into the pipes.
Gotcha.
But a lot of tank companies don't do. I don't know of one around this area that do that anymore.
Do they put filters or screens on here?
Yeah, in certain counties there is a filter, an effluent filter that they can put in here. It's a really good item. In this county, it's not required. One thing with a filter is, you know, it's only as good as if it gets cleaned. There are filters that have warning devices on them to get installed, and that's probably the best thing. Or if the homeowner or pumper are very educated about having them cleaned at certain times, so that, you know, we don't plug the filter, because if the filter does get plugged, you'll see some backing up in the leaching or up into the house.
Right. So if this one had a screen on it, and we were to take the lid off and stand here, we were standing here as we are, what would we be seeing?
You would see.
Is it actually visible?
It is visible. There's a lot of different filters on the market. Most of the filters that we see now are a filter that more or less just be installed right inside the T.
So it just slides.
It just slides right in the T, and you'll see a handle there, and you pull it out. The filter is reusable. It can be to where it just gets washed off and then reinstalled. You know, pull it away from the baffle, wash it off with a hose, and then reinstall it in there.
So do you have to dig up the access lid and open that up, or is there some kind of riser that can be done through?
Well, hopefully, again, that the county's code is, and they might have they're trying to change it now, and it might even be with the riser should be, or this lid should be within 6 inches of the top of the ground.
So you'd take off this 20-inch lid in order to do that maintenance on the screen.
Exactly. And usually it's a thing that where if the screen gets pumped, or the tank gets pumped out, then, you know, the screen should be cleaned.
How would an inspector measure the thickness of the sludge layer and the scum layer? I mean, if you look into it, all you can see is the top of the scum layer or the effluent.
Usually what they can do is if there's a rod with some type of flat platform on it, so you can push it down, and you can push it down onto your scum layer, and then you'll push it through and then slide it over, and then you can pull it back up and you'll feel the scum layer level. Then pushing it down slowly, you'll be able to feel the water level thickness, and then you'll feel the sludge layer down in there, and then push it down the rest of the way until you feel the bottom of the tank.
So it's all by feel, huh?
It's all by feel. There's no good way except for feel.
I was kind of hoping you'd tell me there was something like a big transparent straw you slide down,
You know,
and seal off and lift it up.
They've done that before. I've seen people do that. It's just a lot of people don't like getting that dirty, so it's easier just doing that way.
I read about something called a sludge judge. Are you familiar with those?
You know, I read a little bit about them, but I'm not that familiar about it. Is that kind of the clear pipe type deal?
It was some kind of testing apparatus, kind of like what I'm describing, I think. Maybe we can get one later on and take a look at it, but
sure.
Well, after I guess, is that it for the tank? Anything,
that's it for the tank. I don't know, do you want to look at some of what happens to the existing tank in usage?
Let's do that.
This is something that the inspector should look at.
One thing we should mention here, if you're inspecting components in the tank, we don't want to be sticking our heads down there with a flashlight, do we?
No, I mean, there is gases in there. I mean, it's you know, something that's not that healthy. A lot of times what I'll see people do is have a mirror on a stick, and you can and also in that, when it's inspected, you'll want to probably have something like that type of device so that you can put it down in the tank and look at the seal that's around between the lid and the tank itself. It's like a bowl with a cap on it.
Right.
And that seal should have a tar seal so it seals it off from roots and such. Having that mirror on a stick like that, you can look for roots too, because that is probably one thing that gets in there. And once they get in the septic tank, they pretty much take it over.
Yeah. So to be safe, you want a telescoping mirror and a flashlight, and not stick your head down there just in case there's methane or hydrogen sulfide or some other nasty kind of
Exactly.
gas. Let's take a look at the old one and see if we can get an idea of why it failed.
Okay, when we were looking at the existing tank to see whether or not we could use this tank in with the new applications of the new addition to the leaching field, we were looking at kind of how the septic tank has aged. It was actually come up that this guy is on a well, and he has a water softener, and it's a type that uses salt. That is one thing that is really hard on septic systems. It's hard not only on the concrete, but it's hard on the bacteria action in the septic tank also. If at all possible, it is nice not to have that go into a septic tank or a septic system. It's just really hard on the concrete. You can see the deterioration in the lids. This is a secondary lid, and it's even got some deterioration in it from the gases and that. But again, the salt, water softeners are really hard on septic systems.
Especially the older ones, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they even have, some of the real old ones have concrete tile on them. They attack the concrete tile. It's just nice. That water doesn't have the bacteria in it, and that there's other ways to dispose of that. It greatly helps the septic system.
The water from the softener, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some of those, take a lot of water on their back flushes and send a lot of water out.
So one thing an inspector might look at before he even starts looking at the tank and the system is looking to see what systems are installed in the house that might, like a water softener or dishwashers or other things that might be introducing chemicals that are a problem.
And it's something that you brought up earlier, was it garbage disposal. Garbage disposals aren't the best for septics either. With the items that go into a tank, they've already been usually processed. The heavy solids in that, been processed by the human body. So they've already broken down once. Like a chopped up carrot or vegetables put out here, they're not going to break down very much. So somebody using a garbage disposal heavily should probably look at pumping their tank more often. It's just a chopped up carrot in water probably won't degrade or decompose very fast. So items like that, definitely want to look at, and not put in. And again, you look at a lot of the counties have what they should and should not put in septic systems. And a lot of, you definitely want to stay away from the paints and thinners and stuff like that. Clean your paintbrush after painting that, not a good idea for septic.
It's just a matter of whether the information gets from the county to the homeowner.
Exactly. And a lot of counties are trying to improve that, but it definitely is hard again.
So this is, in this one, the water level is down far enough so that we can actually see the bottom of the baffle, the inlet baffle, which we couldn't over there. Well, and looks like it's down about 18 inches below the top of the tank.
Yep.
Is that pretty typical still?
That's pretty typical because we want that bottom of that pipe to be in that water layer. So when the solids and the effluent coming in will exit into the water layer, so they separate through there.
Now, just looking at this one, at first glance it looks bigger than the new tank because the access lids are further apart, but I guess this is not a round tank.
No, this isn't a round tank. This is a long, skinny oval tank.
So you don't always know just by looking at the lids what's beneath the ground.
How big it is, exactly. This actually probably is about a 1,250 gallon tank, if I remember right, from the records. And it was required to put in a 1,500 gallon tank. So in this tank here is actually deeper, and then being round, it's in different configuration.
Right.
So
But this one is probably the same as far as the separator wall in the
Yep,
center.
it has a
configuration.
baffle wall, so it makes it 2-compartment and everything. In Boulder County, a lot of that, all those codes got changed by most of the states in 1974. So everything prior to 74 was one single compartment, and then they you know, brought up that, you know, having a 2-compartment tank just lets us filter out and lets the solids settle out. One more compartment is just going to help, and it actually does.
So it does a better job without expanding the tank that much.
Exactly. It just requires just one wall through the middle.
Is there anything more we should look at in
No,
the
you can
other
just
side?
see some of the deterioration, and we get usually, we see a lot more deterioration on the outlet of the tank.
Why is that?
You know, we haven't come up with that. You can look on this one a little bit and see that, and it's, I don't know if it's because the gases get, with the water going out, it pulls the gases over that way. I guess we haven't thought about that.
Just one more
But
thing.
the outlet is probably more important to look at than the inlet on the septic tank as far as inspection-wise.
Because that's protecting the distribution box and the leach field.
And then by looking on the outlet, you'll see the deterioration on the tank more there, and you'll need to look at the outlet baffle, and that's what you want to look at also. And you can see on this one that, you know, the tank is starting to deteriorate pretty bad. So I mean, at some point, it's not going to be very safe, just because it's going, you know, that it's going to start to feel the weight of the soil and then probably cave in at some point.
Well, if I were inspecting this, I'd be looking down in there, and I'd say the walls of this thing look pretty slimy, but I don't see any cracks. And I think if there were any cracks that were above the liquid layer, I wouldn't be able to see them anyway, unless they were pretty big.
It's really hard to see cracks in, you know, in a septic tank. I mean, especially because, you know, unless you get in it, get to clean that sides off and really well, it's really hard to you know, see a crack in there. Again, using the mirror net, getting the pumper to clean it, you know, well, while he's pumping it, you know, so that you can maybe try to see the cracks at that point. But the cracks in septic tanks are really hard to see. I mean, the one thing is if the house isn't occupied, looking for lower elevation in the water below the outlet baffle prior to being it pumped would be an indication that there's got to be a crack in that tank. But being in it, if you're inspecting a house that's occupied, it's going to be really hard because they're constantly using water, filling that tank back up. It'd be hard to see when it's, you know, being occupied.
So you're an inspector, and you're responsible for telling your client whether or not the tank is cracked, but it's really hard to tell.
It's really hard to tell.
So
that's the hard part.
So there's a lot of liability there.
There is. There's a lot of liability on that end of it.
Is there any part of this system that doesn't carry a lot of liability?
Not too much. Just ensuring that you're doing the best job that you can.
So how long have you been installing septic systems?
I started in, let's say I started working for my dad in 1977. And my dad started our company in 1960.
Okay, and this is 2008, but you don't inspect septic systems yourself, is that right?
I don't. One of my big, I guess, glitches is that if I would hate to do an inspection for somebody and say, oh, that's your septic system's failed, here's my card. So I haven't got to that step yet. So there's enough inspectors out there that are getting educated well, and with this, you know, it's going to help them to get educated well. So then, and I get a lot of calls, you know, backing up their inspection reports.
Yeah.
And what I usually do is we'll come out and follow up an inspection report, and you know, and see if they can we'll back up their report or not.
So there's enough question about the inspection reports that people get that a lot of people want to have a second opinion.
Exactly, that happens a lot. I spend a lot of time on the phone after hours and talking to people, and you know, they just, you know, like anybody anymore, they just want to make sure that they're not getting taken.
Yeah, especially for a system that might cost $20,000 to replace.
Exactly.
And that's if you have good access to it. I mean, some places it's behind the house, and you can no longer get behind the house with a backhoe.
Yeah, there's a lot in the systems that we just looked at this morning. A lot of them are getting harder and harder to put in because vegetation and trees, and the house gets bigger.
Will, shall we move on from the tanks and to the next component?
Sure.
Effluent leaves the tank.
Effluent leaves the tank. There's a 4-inch PV sewer line coming out to here.
Is this the distribution box?
This is a diverter valve and splitter valve. Since there's an existing septic system or leaching field over here that the engineer wanted to keep in with the plan with the new one, because it's not that old and it's working well.
So this isn't going to be the only leach field for this system. It'll actually use both the old one and the new one.
Exactly. There's an old existing leaching field over there that is roughly about the size of this one. I don't remember exactly how big that is. This is what they call a splitter box, where it comes out and 50% of the effluent will go to the old one and 50% will go to the new one.
So does this actually have a distribution box? This
Yes,
system?
it does. It's buried right about under here. It'd be sitting right here.
So what is the purpose of the distribution box?
The distribution box will equally distribute the water from, you'll have the water coming from either the tank or a diverter valve or splitter box, come into the distribution box, and then depending on how big and how wide the leaching field is, you'll have a set number of leaching or 4-inch perforated pipe going into the leaching field. And the water coming into the distribution box equally distributes the water equally between however many pipe you have in the leaching field.
So it's
This
sort of a
one's
manifold.
Exactly, it's a manifold. Some counties require more of a header. This county here requires a distribution box. And so then this bed is 12 feet wide bed, and it is generally 3 feet. The 4-inch perforated lines run 3 feet off the sides inward, and then 6 foot on center. So that's why we have 2 on this one. So it comes into the distribution box and 1 inlet and then 2 outlets.
Before we leave this area, is this so that there's a riser here so that the distribution can be changed if you want to adjust
Yes, this
that
is
valve?
also a splitter box and a diverter valve. It works for both. So there's a device down in the bottom here that can be switched so that 100% of the water can go to the old system or 100 can go to this system. One of the things with that is that you can actually dry up a system, and with it drying the leaching field out, it lets any of the bacteria that have gotten out there try to eat away at the solids. And that kind of rejuvenates and brings the leaching field and helps the septic system work a little bit better if you can dry them out.
So I guess it depends on what happens out here. If one side were to get saturated more than the other, you might change the valve so that it had a chance to dry out.
If this was a total new system, we probably wouldn't have put the diverter valve type in here, because it would have got 50% each one, and that it worked fine. The way it's designed, the engineer wanted 50% to this one, 50% to this one. But with what we decided, with this being an older system, if we want to let this one dry up, the older one to dry up and let it recover a little bit, would have the option of flipping all the water to this side, to the newer leaching field, and then let the old one rejuvenate a little bit. They don't come back to 100%, but every little bit will give us a little more age on this. So,
and I guess also at some point, since this field is a lot older, it'll fail before this one.
Exactly.
And at that point, you can switch over
to
this
this
one.
and let this one. And worst case is if we were looking at this one failing sooner than this one, in that time, this one could be redone.
Yeah.
This one could be dug out and a new one could put there. So maybe the cost wouldn't be so expensive.
And they still have one to use while that was being worked on.
Exactly. And that's one of our big things is trying to keep the people in the house.
Right.
Nobody wants to go to a hotel room.
Can you explain to us what we're looking at here? What's down below? I mean, what happens after there are 3 pipes going in here, are there?
There's 2 pipes. right here will be a plastic distribution box in here. Everything that we use is went to a plastic distribution box. The main reason, and again, probably probably about end of the 70s and that, they went to plastic distribution boxes in this area. Some that we see, the concrete distribution boxes that we used to use in the past, we have the same deterioration that we get on the tank in a distribution box. That is one thing to look at. The hardest thing is trying to find those guys. They're once you bury them, they're buried and they kind of move, they say.
Can they use, I know you use transmitters and receivers to find tanks. Can you do the same thing to find the distribution box?
You should be able to. Trying to get it to flush down. A lot of the guys have transmitters that can be flushed down the toilets, and actually when they get flushed down, they will set right in that T, and that's what they want. Because they float, and they'll flush it down the sewer line, and then they'll just sit there, and then they can locate that. And then they can, once they locate the inlet, then it's pretty easy to locate the outlet.
So if they wanted to use that to find the distribution box, they'd have to put it in the outlet of the tank and flush it down here somehow.
Exactly. Or I've seen them before. They can put tape it to a snake, sewer snake. Tape it to that, and then if it like this one's not very far away, I mean you would have a trouble with this because we have a splitter box. But if the splitter wasn't in there, you could probably snake it down until you felt it stop, or you know, because the worst case is if it went right through it and it started going down to your leaching field pipe, you know, if it was right across. So if they can find that. But I mean, this is one of the things that the old concrete distribution box was another item that was kind of faulty back then, but that's all they had.
Well, there's probably a good chance that they switched to plastic distribution boxes over a good part of the country about the same time for the same reasons.
I would think so. I mean, most everything you see on is plastic anymore.
So from the distribution box, it goes to two different pipes running in this 12-foot wide leach field.
Exactly, and they're positioned 3 feet off the sides and then 6 foot on centers, and that's where we get our 12 feet wide.
When this was first excavated, how deep was it?
When it was first, what happened first was that when we did the engineering, we dug the test hole to find out, to get the permitting started, the engineer, or the design started, the engineer needs to get a backhoe pit dug. They dig the backhoe pit to determine where bedrock is or water table. The county regulations call that the bottom of the gravel or bottom of the leaching field, depending on what type of leaching field, needs to be 4 feet off of water table or bedrock.
So that's bedrock, or it could be a layer of clay or something that was impermeable, basically?
Yeah, it's usually up to the engineer to define the material to call it bedrock or not. Usually it's something pretty competent, something that the water will go down and hit and not filter through.
Right.
So it could be clay stone that can be dug through. Still, it's not diggable bedrock, but it would be called bedrock because it doesn't let the water transfer through it.
Yeah.
So then we maintained the 4 feet off of that, and that gave us to where we only could have a cut of 1.5 feet. The engineer decided that at 1.5 feet we were still in the dark brown clays, and he wanted to get in more that you can see kind of on the top of the piles is the lighter type. The perk test, he did a perk test on both, and the percolation test was better on the lighter tan stuff. So he made us over excavate underneath the leaching field, and this one's pretty simple. It was only 6 inches deeper. Then at that point he wanted a silty sand brought back in to bring it back up, to bring us back up to the bottom of leaching field being off of water table.
So this was dug deep enough so that you could maintain 4 feet above bedrock or whatever the layer was.
Yeah, there was a water table in this layer, in this area.
Okay, so that was the determining factor here.
And that's why you can kind of see on the existing systems kind of mounted, and that kind of gives us an idea. There was a reason why it was mounted then, and he saw the water stain levels in the test hole.
So from the bottom of the excavation, you put...
on this one, we were 2 feet deep, so on this one, and not always, on a standard system you wouldn't have this, but we put 6 inches of silty sand to bring us up to get our 4 feet separation.
And so that'll allow air and water to move through fairly well, so it'll be aerobic and a good place for bacteria to work on the field.
And then from there we have 1 foot of gravel, with a 4-inch perforated pipe centered in it, meaning there's 6 inches of gravel underneath the pipe, a 4-inch pipe, and then 2 on top of it.
Gotcha.
And then prior to backfill, a landscaping fabric that would, so that we don't get any of the fines going down into the gravel to seal the voids, the air voids in the gravel, so it can transfer the water better.
So were you able to use soil from this site to cover the fabric?
Exactly. This one here, the soil wasn't that bad where the engineer, he described it, we could use the existing soil to backfill it.
Mm-hmm.
If the soil was had a slower perk rate, meaning a higher perk rate, they would probably maybe recommend a wicking soil so we get some type of evaporation, but this one, the on-site soil was fine.
So the perk rate, the perk test is a test done to determine how fast water can move through the soil, is that right?
Exactly. The perk test is done either on a new application, or the county, Boulder County requires a new perk test done even on a repair to make sure that the first engineer was correct with his percolation test. Just making sure everybody's doing their job right. With the percolation rate and the amount of bedrooms that they have in there, and in Boulder County they size it 2 people per bedroom could live in the house, 75 gallons per day per person gives you your daily flow, and then with the percolation rate of the soil gives us the size of the leaching field that we need.
And I guess
the square footage.
The soil composition is the other thing that goes into the design that they have to calculate into the design.
Yeah, the percolation rate does a lot of that though. That's what they're looking for, how fast the ground takes the water. With that in you know, with the amount that the ground can absorb is kind of what they size it by.
Gotcha. So the soil piled up along the edges of the leach field is soil that wasn't very good for this purpose, and it's got to be hauled out of here, is that right?
No, this is more the topsoil. We separated topsoil on the side, and it will go back on top so that we can revegetate it. We keep trying to better the topsoil's on top so we can reuse it.
How much soil will wind up being on top of the fabric? I mean, how much of a mound will you have here when you're done?
It's a minimum of 1 foot and a maximum of 3 feet in Boulder County.
And I would imagine it's probably pretty similar in most jurisdictions.
It's pretty close. Well County, that's east of us here, they have a minimum of the. So that comes back again that we can, in Boulder County, we can go 4 foot deep with the bottom of our gravel. Meaning that when I dig a test hole for the septic design and permitting to start, I dig an 8 foot deep hole. If we have no water there, that lets us have the 4 foot filtering zone, and then we can go 4 feet deep. Different counties are different. Well County, they only let us go 3 feet deep. So they're more of an ag county, so they're usually a little bit more protective of the water supplies. But different counties have different regulations.
Looks like that may cover the leach field. This is a bed as opposed to a trench system. Is
Exactly.
that right?
A lot of the older systems that you saw back installed in the 60s and 70s, they used a lot of trench type systems, 3 foot wide trenches. Pretty much the same kind of a foot of gravel, pipe centered in it, in the center of the 3 feet. What happens a lot of the engineers are going away from that because they take up a lot of space. The offset in between trenches is 6 feet. So if we would separate this in 3 foot strips, you know, the leaching field would probably go quite a ways over that way. And a lot of people are trying to use that. There's debate on whether or not trenches work better. Sidewall absorption is a lot of it. A lot of leaching fields, when they're mid-age, 10, 15, into 20-year-old age, you will see some greener or an outline, greener grass or an outline around the outside. A lot of engineers think that the sidewall will actually absorb water faster than the soil that's been disturbed and put back in. So I mean, it makes kind of sense going back into the old repairs and that you can see usually the outline of the leaching field.
So you'd have not only absorption on the bottom of the trench, you'd have absorption plus gravity pushing water down, but like, apparently the gravity doesn't make that much difference if the sidewalls absorb
Yeah,
almost as fast.
absorption is a lot of leach and what happens to leach and field, but there's a lot more evaporation than the people think. It is moist in there, you know, and a lot of the clay soils, we got a lot of clay soils around the area. They have a tendency to, you know, to get that moisture come up, and then it will suck that moisture up, and you'll get greenier grass. You can see actually on the old leach and field the grass difference between here than out there on the flats. You know, you're getting more water. So most of it, septics like this one's a combination absorption and evaporation.
So if you see greener vegetation on top of the leach field, it's not always a sign of failure.
It's not always a sign. There's a fine line where it'll show failure when you start getting over excess grass growing upward. One of the big things to look for is like if you do see the outline, that's going to happen a lot. You start seeing the center fill in, you know, it's getting, you know, starting to having to evaporate more. Then you start getting the darker colored grasses. It could be the nitrates, because it is nitrates is somewhat of a fertilizer. So you know, you're going to get some better grass growing on there. But the next thing would be to do is definitely the best thing to do on an inspection on a leaching field is dig a hole down into the gravel. You have your foot layer of gravel in there, dig down into it, see where your water elevation is. That gives you indication if it's a foot thick. You know, if you're at the bottom and there's a little bit of water, that's probably fine. You know, it's just finding its way. Again, it comes down to the usage. But then the higher that water gets, the more, you know, once you're getting into the leaching field, above the 6-inch layer, above, you know, from the bottom of the gravel to be more or less to the bottom of the leaching field pipe, and you start backing that pipe up, you are starting to back up water effluent throughout the whole system, depending on the elevation difference. This one's pretty level. This house is, you know, sets down on the ground pretty much, you know, and the property's pretty flat. So we're all pretty, you know, we got minimum grades everywhere we can do to maintain our depth here. You know, some sites, you know, where they have more elevation difference, you know, you have more grade to it. And you don't have to worry about it. But your biggest thing is once everything starts backing up, at some point, it's going to back up in the house, and then they're going to have a backup in one of the fixtures.
Well, so inspectors can look for difference of color in vegetation on the leach field, and I guess depending on where you are, there'll be different kinds of vegetation growing on it once it starts to fail, or once effluent starts to get fairly close to the surface.
Yeah, I mean, the greener it is, I mean, I've had a few older families that had young kids in it, and they never had to water the leaching field because it always kept it nice and green. But then they got older, went to college and that, called us up and said, hey, something's got to be the matter with the septic. All the grass on top is dying. And it's actually, it was, you know, working fine, but it was just with that gravel layer in there, he couldn't water enough because that gravel layer works as a drain. You know, it works as a drain, and that's what it pretty much is. And it sucked the water out of it, so you had that.
Somebody told me, an installer in the mountains told me that one of the things he looks for in the mountains of Colorado is fireweed growing on a leach field. So I guess depending on where you are in North America, you might see different kinds of plants growing on them at a certain point.
Exactly. You'll see a lot of thistles. I mean weeds, because they grow so fast and so easy. You'll see weeds more than a dense grass. So you start to see more intense weeds. You know that they're probably the system is starting to have to evaporate. When it starts to fail and it cannot absorb, it's got to go somewhere, and it's going to find an area to where it have to start to evaporate.
So if it can't go down, it's going to come up
somewhere. So it starts going up, and when it starts, so you're getting to the point of where it maybe needs to be looked at or replaced.
So you can dig a test hole through the gravel bed or through the trench and get an idea.
Just a little post hole. Just dig a small post hole down through it. Some guys have actually put prods down, trying to wobble the prod out and push it down, and if you can look through that hole good enough to see if you know you're pretty close to failure and you don't want to dig
Yeah.
dig the hole, you can use the prod and puck it down. And sometimes once you penetrate the top of the gravel, and that soil is kind of is more or less a cap. Once you penetrate that with a prod or such, you can actually get the water to come right up. It's, because you have more or less a contained water that's is trying to find its way somewhere. And and water, just like groundwater, will follow its easiest path. So if you penetrate the upper soils, it'll come right through and pop up to the top.
So they act as kind of a cap. When you penetrate that cap, it'll come to the surface.
Exactly. Yeah. That's one that's failing pretty bad.
So since an inspector is looking at a septic system, most of which is under the ground, and about the only thing he can actually see is what he can see by opening the lids of the tank, one option they have is to drill a hole and look at basically a profile of the bed or the trench.
Exactly.
So there's some options anyway.
Yeah, that's the best option is actually doing some physical work and getting down and digging that.
Yeah.
It just gives you better indication of what's going to go on. I mean, just to kind of recap it, is just trying to be, the first thing is before you get on site would be contact your county health department, pull every piece of paper that they have on the property. Just gives you somewhat of a guidelines to go when you go out there, and it might, even if it's undocumented, it might be to where you got to tell the people, the county, it's undocumented, you're looking at probably a system that should be repaired or replaced because it hasn't been looked at, could be not been put in properly. Once you have the paperwork come out on site, look at the septic tank, see the elevation of the septic tank. If it's at the right elevation, check the outlet baffles and the inlet baffle to make sure that they're in proper shape. Check the structure of the tank, how good the concrete is.
Watertight.
Watertight.
The quality of the lid.
Exactly. And then the next step would be trying to follow up with trying to give them an idea of what the leaching field, what shape the leaching field's in by digging a small hole. Sometimes it might require one on each end to give them an idea, whether or not one end's getting loaded up more than the other. We usually try to do 2 holes if we're just looking to see if how the system's working.
So do you mainly do holes only on older systems where you suspect that maybe there's something wrong, or how often do you do
Yeah, I mean, generally, the one thing that comes into play is age. You're always looking at age is septic's enemy. The older it gets, the more potential of it failing. So, I mean, you're looking at age. The first thing when I pull documents up, you look at a 30-year-old septic, the first thing is this thing's pretty old. Next question to anybody that actually has lived in the house for quite a long time, has it been occupied, big family the whole time? Single guy in there, the whole time. It gives you an idea how much load has been on the system. Gives you an indication on your how long the life of the septic.
So if you can get an idea of how it's been used, you might have a better idea of what condition it might be
Exactly. Because age comes into play a lot.
Well, with so much of it underground, it sounds like one of the best tools an inspector could have is a good disclaimer.
That could be right. I know on Boulder County's own website, or on own diagram or inspection sheets, they even gave you one on that too.
Well, I think we've about covered it all, Greg. Been very helpful. Thanks for giving us your time.
You bet.